If you are planning a trip to Japan, this video is for you because whether it is your first time traveling to Japan or your fifth, planning a trip to Japan can be very stressful because there are just a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to book and reserve ahead of time. So I'm really hoping that this video helps alleviate some of that pressure by outlining and identifying the things that you should be considering and thinking about as you're planning your trip to Japan. Now, I know how chaotic planning a Japan trip can be, and so I actually created a very simple Japan travel checklist that is a free downloadable on my website. I'll leave a link to this checklist below in the video description box, and I'll also leave a link to the blog post I have on my website that outlines everything that we're going to be talking about in this video. But again, this checklist is going to be just the basic things that you need, and it's going to cover everything that we're going to talk about in this video. Honestly, this is the checklist that I use every single time just to make sure I have everything just in line, ready to go. There's nothing super important that I'm forgetting, and so I really do hope that this checklist and the blog post and this video is just super helpful for you as you're planning. And I just want to caveat too that everything that we're going to be talking about in this video and everything that I have written down in my blog post and all of that are all based on my past personal experience and also past research that I've done to prepare for Japan trips. So all of that knowledge that I've gained from those experiences are in that blog post and are going to be talked about in this video. Now, I do recommend that you actually watch other people's videos as well and just get their perspective and their travel tips because we're all coming at it from a place of personal experience. So the more experiences you hear about, you can take all of that knowledge and then make the executive decision for yourself on what would be best for you and your circumstances. So without further ado, let's get into the things you need to do before your trip to Japan. So I'm actually going to use, like I said, my Japan travel checklist. Again, this is a free downloadable on my website and I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. Okay, so the first thing on our list of things to do before going to Japan is just to make sure you have an itinerary laid out for when you want to do all the things you want to do. And the reason why having an itinerary is important to do beforehand is because you want to check to make sure that the things you want to do are actually going to be open on the days you want to do them. And sometimes if you're going into a Japan trip, not thinking about that ahead of time could end up with you not being able to do the thing you want to do because of a holiday closure, or sometimes restaurants aren't open on like Tuesdays or Wednesdays randomly, sometimes Mondays, or there's a random holiday. So if there are things on your Japan bucket list that you just really need to do on your trip, I highly recommend planning out ahead of time what specific day you want to do it and figure out and look into, do I need to make advanced online reservations? It's just something that you want to get ahead of so that you can hit all the things that you want to hit. So again, number one thing you should do when planning a trip to Japan is to actually figure out what days you want to do what so that you can then research and just double check that it's going to be open the day you want to do it and that you know exactly what you need to do in order to get reservations, tickets, bookings, whatever beforehand. Now, this is not to say I am not about winging it when traveling in Japan. I do feel like there are certain circumstances that you don't really need to have a game plan for. For instance, food-wise, I think that unless there's a place you just really, really want to try, for me, I don't typically plan out where I'm going to eat each day. I plan my days around certain attractions or make main things in areas that I want to visit. But food-wise, I typically don't really worry about that because in Japan, good food is everywhere, whether it be in a konbini or just a random shop that you stumble upon. Some of my best meals in Japan have actually come from just random shops that I have just stumbled into because I was just hungry and it was open and that was that, and it was amazing. So food, I don't think, unless you really, really want to go to a specific place, I don't think that you really need to be so strict about planning out what you're going to eat on what days. Oh, but I will say, if there is a very popular place that you want to visit and it's on your like, I must go here list, I would say to plan around getting there right when it opens or making a reservation. A lot of the popular places that you see online usually have a really long queue the minute it opens. And so to avoid wasting your precious time in Japan waiting in line, I recommend getting there right when it opens or a little bit before, or seeing if you can make a reservation because, yeah, those popular places, man, they're good for a reason, but they're also, I don't know. If you have limited time in Japan, I would say maybe skip those popular places and just walk around and find a mom and pop shop because the food is going to probably be pretty good. Okay, the next thing on my Japan travel checklist is to make sure my passport is one, in my luggage, ready to go, and two, that it is valid and not expired. Now, you want to check this immediately. When you decide you want to go to Japan, I feel like one of the first things you should do is to make sure you have a valid passport, that it's not going to expire before your trip or anything like that, because I feel like sometimes the process to like renew your passport can take some time. So you just don't want it to be something that last minute you realize needs to get done. So just right away, make sure you have a valid passport and that you're going to be okay on the day that you travel to Japan. And then another thing you really want to do is also check to make sure your country doesn't need an additional visa to get in and so forth. So definitely check online to see what needs to be done in order for you to enter and leave Japan. And if you need to check whether or not you need a visa for your country, I actually have a link to the website where you can check it in the Japan travel checklist I have. And that link is also in the blog post that I talked about earlier, which is again linked in the video description box below. So the next thing on the list of things to do and book before your trip to Japan is to make sure you have all your hotel and Airbnb reservations covered. So you want to make sure you have a place to stay for all the days you're in Japan. Like, this seems like a no-brainer, but I don't know. I feel like this is just something that needs to be listed on a list just to double check to make sure it is done before you go. And while we're on the topic of hotels and Airbnbs, I just want to give a few tips. So a few tips for hotels and Airbnbs in Japan is to, one, if you're staying at an Airbnb, to check to see if there's any special instructions that the Airbnb has for you. I feel like in Japan, and maybe this is in other countries too, but there are just a lot of instructions and regulations and things that you need to consider before staying there. So just make sure you read through everything and that you are super clear on what needs to be done and what the rules are of the place before you book it. Another thing to really keep in mind when it comes to accommodations in general in Japan is I really recommend making sure the place you stay is close to a station, that it's walkable or easy to get to, or maybe has a shuttle that can get you to the station easy, because trust me, rolling your suitcase through the streets of Japan is a lot harder and more tiring than you would expect. There's random hills, the streets are not always even. So my biggest tip for accommodation is to make sure you are close to a station, because that is just going to make your life so much easier when it comes to getting around in Japan, especially when you gotta lug your luggage. Another thing to keep in mind, especially if you're staying in hotels, is to check the room size of the hotel. What I do is I always like to look up the square footage that they list on the hotel website for the room, because Japan hotel rooms tend to be on the smaller size unless you're staying in like a luxury hotel. One thing that I think is really funny with Japan hotels is that sometimes they'll say, oh, this room fits like 4 people, when in fact it's like 2 double beds and they're squished close together and there's no room for luggage for said 4 people. So I don't know. It's just something just to keep in mind, that sometimes when it says sleep 4, check the square footage, check the whole bed situation of what that truly means, because yeah, you don't want to go there and then realize that, yes, 4 bodies can fit in said hotel room, but there's no way that all of your luggage is going to fit comfortably. So yeah, definitely check to see how big the room actually is before booking. Just trust me. Okay, the next thing on my list is to convert your cash to yen. I would definitely do the due diligence to research your options of exchanging your cash to yen, whether it be your bank or like what your options are for exchanging near where you're going to stay in Japan. Typically in Japan, a lot of people recommend doing 7-Eleven. Just something to keep in mind and something to research before you leave for Japan is just where you're going to get your yen, because if you're going to be in like Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, and like the bigger cities, a lot of the places do take card or they take the IC cards. You can just pay through that. But there are also a lot of places that are cash only, and that would honestly really suck if you're standing in line for a place and you find out that it's cash only and then you can't pay for the thing that you want. So yeah, I always recommend carrying cash on you just so you don't run into a situation where you don't have the means to pay for a service or good. The next thing on my Japan travel checklist is to make sure you have your credit or debit cards, whatever cards you want to take to Japan with you. I just have it there as a thing to keep in mind and remind you, like, if you want to bring it, make sure it's packed and ready to go. The next thing I have on my Japan travel checklist is just to make sure you have copies of your passports, IDs, credit, debit cards, all of that, just so you don't run into a situation where something happens and you don't have an ID. So yeah, just make sure you have copies of all your important documents. I also have listed here 2 apps that I think that you should download before going to Japan that are just going to be super clutch and helpful for when you're there. And that is 1, Google Maps for transit. Google Maps is my recommended app to use when you're traveling through Japan, because in my experience, it has given me the best recommendations for what transit to take, whether it be bus or train or what directions to walk in. One thing that I really love about Google Maps is that it actually will tell you what platform to stand on to get on the correct train. It sometimes gives you recommendations of like what car to get on the train. So yeah, it's just the best. It's my favorite. I also recommend that you download Google Translate. Unless you're fluent in Japanese, then, maybe you don't need it. But for me, I always love having Google Translate because not everything is going to be translated into English or your language for you. So I just recommend having that handy in case there's a need for you to translate something. When you're in a place like Tokyo or Kyoto or Osaka, where there's a lot of foreign travelers, there's going to be a lot of signs that are already translated into English for you, but I just wouldn't expect it. So just having Google Translate already downloaded on my phone just gives me the peace of mind that no matter where I go, I'm going to be able to read things and kind of be able to get around. And on top of that, it's not listed on my Japan travel checklist, but I do want to point out that I think it is really essential to know at least a few Japan travel phrases before you go to Japan, because not only is it respectful, but it's also just going to make your life so much easier. Just knowing simple phrases like how to say thank you or excuse me, it's just super key. And I feel like you don't need to be fluent in Japanese, but just learning just a few key phrases I think are just going to really make your time in Japan just that much better. And the next thing on this list of things you should do before you leave for Japan is to make sure you order your portable Wi-Fi or SIM card, eSIM, whatever it is that's going to help you stay connected while you're in Japan. A lot of the times, especially if you're reserving a portable Wi-Fi or SIM card, you'll need to actually book those things prior to departing for Japan, just so that they can make sure that they have what you need in stock and ready to go for you. Now, for me, my mobile service in the US actually allows me to have international calling and data and all of that. However, it is not the best when I'm in Japan. Like, for some reason, it's just really slow and just doesn't work like I need it to. And so because of that, I always make sure I also have either a pocket Wi-Fi or some sort of SIM available to me so that I can stay connected while I'm there. So the difference between a pocket Wi-Fi and a SIM card and eSIM is that a SIM card is something that you can get for your phone if your phone is unlocked. And it's something that you can order ahead of time, pick it up at the airport, and you're good to go. Or sometimes there's an option where it can be delivered to your hotel, or it can be delivered to your place of residence. There's also the option of getting an eSIM, which no additional hardware is needed. There's no need to wait in line for anything. You just typically get a QR code and scan it and you're good to go. So that is also an option for you. The third option is having a physical pocket Wi-Fi, which allows multiple devices to connect to it. And it's similar to a SIM card where you want to make sure you order it and reserve it before you leave for your trip to just make sure they have it in stock. You can pick it up from the airport or have it delivered to your hotel or place of residence, wherever you're staying in Japan. So that is another option. In the past, I have always gotten a pocket Wi-Fi. It is just something that I'm familiar with. It's just really easy for me. It doesn't take up a lot of space in my purse. And also I like getting a pocket Wi-Fi because I am a remote worker. So that is typically why I tend to get a pocket Wi-Fi. Although I do really like the convenience of the eSIM where you can just activate it right away and not have a moment of being disconnected. So yeah. All right, so next on the list is the JR Pass if you need it. Now, JR Pass I used to always get until they raised the prices in October 2023. And after they raised the prices, honestly, the JR Pass really hasn't been something that I feel like is cost effective anymore. Where it would be cost effective would be if you were planning to take a bunch of long distance trips to all these different places in a short amount of time, then maybe it could be cost effective for you. There's actually a really great JR trip calculator that you can actually calculate whether or not a pass would be beneficial for you. I have that linked in my blog post on my website, so you can check it out there. But for the most part, like let's say you are going from Tokyo to like Kyoto or Osaka and then making the round trip straight back. Most of the time, that is not a situation where you need a JR pass. It's just not worth it anymore if you're just going to do the one long trip. I definitely recommend you use that calculator to figure out whether or not your trip needs the JR pass. And if it turns out that you do need a JR pass, it is definitely something that you need to book before you leave for Japan. So definitely, once you figure out your itinerary, where you want to go, plug your travel dates into that JR calculator, see if you need a pass, and make sure you book it before your trip. So the next thing on my Japan travel checklist is to make sure you reserve your guided tour or bus tour tickets. If you would prefer to do some sort of tour, that is something that you would need to reserve ahead of time. So you just want to make sure you're booked and ready to go before you go on your trip. The next thing on my Japan travel checklist is to book your tickets for any main attractions in Japan. I have a whole blog post dedicated specifically to booking reservations to main Japan attractions because it can get quite complicated, especially if you're considering going to places like Ghibli Museum in Mitaka, Tokyo. It is just so hard to get tickets and definitely takes some planning and strategizing to make sure that you get tickets on the exact date and time that you want to go. So yeah, definitely like make sure if there is something like a main attraction, meaning Ghibli Museum, Ghibli Park, USJ, which is Universal Studios Japan, the Making of Harry Potter Museum, Disneyland, Disney Sea, even the Team Labs. There are Team Lab pop-ups and museums all across Japan. Some of them, you really do need to reserve your tickets ahead of time, especially if they're in very populous locations. You just want to make sure that tickets are available on the date you want to go because sometimes they can sell out and then that would really suck if you can't go and you really, really wanted to visit. So themed cafes are also another thing that I would check into. For instance, like the Pokemon Cafe, Kirby Cafe, any like character or popular, just themed cafes. If you want to go to a specific themed cafe, make sure it's open the day you want to go. check to see if you need to make reservations ahead of time. A lot of the times you do. Sometimes if they're really popular, they can sell out like a month or 2 months in advance. I just really recommend that if there's a place you find in Japan that you really, really want to go to, I would immediately look in to see if you need to do any sort of pre-trip booking, because you just never know how popular it is. And, I just want to make sure you're able to do all the things on your list. And the biggest way you're going to be able to do that is to just have a game plan going into it, and to, when you think that it's something that you for sure want to do, just go to the website and just see if there's anything you need to do for tickets, reservations, and I would just get ahead of it and just get it off your things to do. This is why we have the Japan travel checklist, and it is why I have all of these blog posts on my website, because I know how stressful it can be, I know how complicated it can be, and I just hope that these can be resources for you to just make your life a little bit easier when it comes to planning your amazing, amazing Japan trip. Again, if there are any specific attractions you want to go to, the ones I have listed in my blog post in particular are Ghibli Museum, Ghibli Park, Disneyland, Disney Sea, Team Labs, and I think I have some character-themed cafe tips on there as well, but a lot of times for that, they're like always rotating around, but I have some tips for the ones that were available when I wrote the blog post. So the last 2 things on my Japan travel checklist that are the essentials are to just make sure you have all your medicines that you need, and then also that you bring comfortable shoes. You will be walking/moving around a lot in Japan. You can easily clock 10 to 20,000 steps a day, easy. So just make sure you bring very, very comfortable walking shoes. So yeah, just plan to walk a lot and bring those comfy shoes, and you'll be good. All right, I feel like I did a lot of talking, but I hope that this video was helpful for you and that it helped just really pinpoint the things you need to do before your trip to Japan, and just gives you an idea of things to think about if you're planning your future Japan trip. Again, I have all of this stuff written down in blog posts on my website. I know I'm a broken record. I've said that a million times throughout this video, but I just want to make sure that you are armed to the teeth with as much information as possible to help you be able to do all the things you want to do on your Japan trip. So again, I really hope this video was helpful. If you are looking for additional things to add to your Japan itinerary, or just other Japan travel tips and places to visit, things to do, definitely check out my other videos on my channel. I have even more Japan travel videos, vlogs, and guides to really help you just make the most of your time in Japan. So again, I hope this video is helpful, and thank you so much for spending your time with me. I will see you next time. Bye!